at its very core, is about is providing parents the right, not the opportunity, to support their child through the formative years of their life and some very important decisions that our children are facing.
Well, Saskatchewan's controversial bill on the use of pronouns in schools is now law. It will prevent children under the age of 16 from changing their names or pronouns at school without getting parental consent first. It uses the notwithstanding clause to override sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as Saskatchewan's own Human Rights Code. The opposition New Democrats opposed it, saying it strips the rights of vulnerable people. The front bench is back on this. Sabrina Grover joining us, James Moore, Guradan Singh, and our very own Rachel Aiello. Sabrina, let me start with you on this. Transphobic or not, as some groups have said?
I think that this is a very slippery slope to the limiting of rights and the rollback of civil liberties of LGBTQ and specifically trans people and youth in the province of Saskatchewan. There's really very few interpretations of this law that won't cause harm, won't actively likely cause destructive impacts on children who are going to face the brunt of this. And I think that what most civil liberties groups have called for in saying that this is transphobic is correct. And you only have to look to the United States to see how those impacts have already played out.
To you, James Moore in Vancouver, your thoughts on the use of the notwithstanding clause, which some have said, is a pretty extreme measure circumventing constitutional rights.
It is, and I do find it discomforting for a bunch of reasons. Look, the politicization of children in either direction, I think, is tragic and unnecessary. I think the number of kids that were, like, Premier Moe's position here, I think would have been strengthened dramatically so if he said, we believe that parents should be involved in the conversation. We do believe that parents need to come first and parents need to be informed. However, we do also recognize that there are children who do feel ostracized, who feel bullied, and that suicide rates amongst children in the LGBTQ plus community are much higher than is imaginable. And we need while we're doing this on the one side, we're going to put in policies in order to protect kids on the other. I think his argument would be much stronger. However, also realize that according to a Leger poll that was in the Canadian press, 63% of Saskatchewan residents support this, 21% oppose. It's a 3-to-1 net support in favor of this legislation. So there are a lot of people in Saskatchewan who don't like Scott Moe, who don't vote for Scott Moe, but do believe in the principles of this. I think the making this overly aggressive and not having enough counterbalance in his messaging to show empathy for children out there who are at risk, I think is a mistake by the Premier.
Interesting too, Guradan. It doesn't seem like there was any sort of big outcry by thousands of parents in Saskatchewan on this particular issue. Nevertheless, as James pointing out, the polls are the polls. Politically, why do this? What do you think is happening here?
Well, I think what's really happening is this is an importation of American-style culture war to Canada, and it has no place here. The very fact that he's running over the charter which is meant to protect marginalized communities, often from the masses. So the very nature of the charter is to ensure that people are protected, especially marginalized and vulnerable communities such as the LGBTQ plus community, and specifically trans individuals. So this is abhorrent. It's a terrible decision, and it effectively puts those who are most marginalized in greater danger and in a position where they're less able to access the supports that they need to live their lives to their fullest and happiest. So it's a bad decision, and it's really a kind of politics that has no place here in Canada.
To you, Rachel Aiello, and some of the critics had said, well, what's the effect going to be on trans kids whose parents may not be aware that they are trans or that they are questioning their orientation one way or another? In some cases, they may live in households where their parents are not on board at all, and as a result of this, in fact, they could be unintentionally outed by what's going on here. Give us some of the context.
Yeah, I think everyone needs to be reminded of the real life, human, personal impacts. We're talking about children, we're talking about trans youth who are already marginalized and, as James pointed out, at a higher risk for thoughts of suicide. One important thing to note there, Todd, is the statistics and the data shows that gender affirming care helps persuade or assuage those thoughts of self-harm. But politically here, I think we also have to keep in mind, when we are talking about overriding the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to make a case. I think people are right to ask questions. And one of the points here that has really stuck out to me, Todd, was something that was revealed in the court documents as this process played out in the courts, was a suggestion that this came about from 18 letters, 7 of which could be determined from actual parents. So this is Saskatchewan residents writing to their government suggesting, hey, what was going on in New Brunswick might be a good idea. Should we try this here? Certainly, I'm sure they've heard from other folks on this, but that is a very small number of people that had written to the government expressing a desire for this. I had seen numbers suggesting 4% of people surveyed thought this should be the top priority for any government. So for Moe to bring back the ledge and do it in this way, ram this through, is something I would be curious to hear people's positions on. And broadly, I think some of the polling that has been brought up was about the question of whether or not parental information should be there, whether parents should have rights. And this is kind of the blanket messaging that is being put over this entire issue, frankly, oversimplifying all that's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, Sabrina, to you as well, because the language that's used, when you frame it the following way, look, parents should have the right to be involved, and of course every parent would say, yes, I do, but it becomes a little bit more nuanced when you talk about this particular issue. And from the Moe government, we've heard this time and again, this is about making sure parental rights are being respected. Others would say, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah, I think this is well beyond just a parental rights issue in the way that it has been simplified, and perhaps the way that people are consuming that media in Saskatchewan has maybe dulled that outcry or that response. But I think also at the end of the day, the people that are most impacted, who are at this point potentially having their existence and their ability to freely express themselves questioned, it's hard to necessarily see them coming forward and being on the against side of this so vocally, given the hate and the pushback that we've seen from these anti-LGBTQ protesters. And so I think to James's point that this is not the way that the Premier should have gone about this, that there is a lack of perspective on how this is going to affect youth, and that it's hard to be able to quantify how many lives this is going to affect going forward. As
a longtime conservative, James, are you worried about, as Garattan was saying, the importation of so-called culture wars from the U.S. into Canada?
Well, I mean, it's happening on all sides. I mean, look, I know I have a lot of friends in Saskatchewan. I got my master's degree at the University of Saskatchewan. I love that province. I love the people there. I don't think 2/3 of the people of Saskatchewan are American-style culture war bigots who don't care about at-risk youth. And to call them that, I think, is out of line and wrong. And it's a slander on the people of Saskatchewan. People of Saskatchewan also, they believe in a balance. They believe that parents are also, in the overwhelming circumstance, are the best people to be equipped to help and support their kids who might have gender identity issues that they're working through as youth, and to castigate all parents as though if you're coming down on the side of parents, you must be coming down against children who are at risk. I think there's a balance here that is reasonable, that is thoughtful. I wish Premier Moe, again, in his communications had been more balanced in that, as opposed to just, being more aggressive about this on the one side. And I think if he counterbalanced his message, he would be right to do so. But I think that for Mr. Singh and others to say that if you're in favor of this legislation, then you must be somehow have no compassion for at-risk youth, I think is dramatically too far, and it slanders 2/3 of the people of Saskatchewan who support this move.
Yeah, Garattan, your read on that, in terms of how you characterized it, what do you think?
Well, let's be clear. Premier Scott Moe is importing American-style culture war into Saskatchewan. The very fact that he's disregarding science, he's disregarding research, the fact that he's running rampant over the charter, something that is meant to protect Canadians across the board, especially minority marginalized communities. I take a very clear position in criticizing Premier Scott Moe's choice to politicize children and at-risk trans youth who are, as clearly articulated, at a higher degree of suicide and risk. So it is wrong what Premier is doing. He is importing American-style culture war tactics into Canada, and ultimately this is done as a distraction, as a way to take people's attention away from the concerted decision to not invest in healthcare, education, and other very important public services, and instead to distract people with these kind of policies that ultimately hurt those who need the greatest amount of support.
We're going to have to leave the front bench there, but thanks to all four of you for joining us. Garattan Singh, James Moore, Sabrina Glover, and Rachel Aiello. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.